Hi, everyone. So I'm Chris. I work for IBM in their cybersecurity division. And today I'm going to talk to you today about how AI is helping push limits. So before we start, and just as I look around this room today, it's full of highly motivated, highly professional people who are always pushing the limits. Personally, myself, I'm an aspiring runner, a marathon runner, and I have an unhealthy focus on running marathons in under 3 hours. I'm continuously pushing limits. So this is me at the start of a run. This is me towards the end of a run. And I'm sure we all feel like this as we get to the end of the week, as we've been dealing with the latest, inundated with emails, work, threat information, incidents, alerts in our SOC environment, dealing with regulatory updates, compliance reports, data, etc. We all are reaching limits. And our security teams are absolutely no different. Our SOC teams in particular are continuously operating right at their limit. We all know that across the industry as a whole, there's a lot of still burnout in the analyst community. They're just having to deal with so much work. There's so many things for them to look at, so many data points for them to consume and action. And as a result, they don't get to all of this work. And at the same time, they are operating right at their limit and pushing them into the red. Now, as humans, we all have limits. We all have limits. Apparently, as I was researching for this talk, humans can absorb about 2.5 petabytes worth of data. They can stay awake for 11 hours. Apparently, we can run at 40 miles an hour. I can't run anywhere near that, despite all my best efforts. So we've got these limits that we've had to work within. But of course, we continue to push those limits. And throughout the recent times, we've gone through different eras of technology that have enabled us to push our limits, to extend our limits and do more, be it from the mainframe to the PC to web and cloud. All of them have enabled us to lift the limits on productivity and throughput. But each of those stages, as well as lifting our limits, has obviously presented new opportunities to attackers. As each new technology has come in to help us improve, the attack surface effectively has increased. Our organization's attack surface has increased. There have been more data to collect, newer types of threats that need to be where the data points all need to be knitted together, more vulnerabilities, more types of underlying security telemetry, more things to monitor. Each of these has made the job of our security teams just more and more challenging, even though we're pushing the limits for our organizations. And it's increasing exponentially now. Now we are in the AI era, where AI is now able to really help us push the limits in terms of the amount of data that can be analyzed and made actionable by a human. So if we think about it as these different eras have happened and more data has had to be generated and analyzed by security teams, more threats have had to be collected and analyzed, now AI represents a way to make all of that consumable. But of course, it's going to raise our security limits, but it's also going to raise the limits on attackers also on what they can achieve. So let's take a look at AI in cyber, and we think about there's lots of different use cases for AI in cyber, from detection, response, etc. But they all fundamentally boil down to two main outcomes: helping automate helping automate the mundane, and up-leveling our teams, up-leveling our people so that they can interpret security data more effectively and more quickly. And this is really good news for us because that's one of the biggest challenges we have as a security space. There is just so much data and the skill level required to analyze that is very high, and the amount of data required to interpret it and action it is also very high. So AI is really nicely positioned to help us with those. Of course, we've been on an AI journey for a long time. Actually, I was just discussing with the next speaker in the green room there that AI has been around a long time. We've seen a continual evolution of AI, from around a couple of decades ago when machine learning came in, then deep learning, and now we're into a new area of large language models. What is important is each of these types of AI is very complementary. Not one is replacing the other, and they all are set to help us with our security outcomes in a really meaningful way. And we've been doing that for a number of years. People are leveraging AI in security today and driving improved outcomes. So what have we learned over the years? Certainly, as a product manager at IBM, we've been embedding AI throughout our portfolios for a number of years, and we've learned there's certain really great outcomes that AI can really help with, but there are a couple of things that have to be done right. First of all, users need to trust it. Users need to trust the output of it, that when the AI is giving its output, that they can understand why it's giving that output, so there's transparency there, and they can understand the underlying data behind the data behind that recommendation. And secondly, it has to be part of the workflow. It can't be this annoying thing off to the side that's giving its opinion, that's always disagreeing with everything else. It has to be integrated into the workflow and complement other inputs and contexts that we're providing to our security teams. When we do this, that's when AI can really help push those limits and raise those limits. Otherwise, it can actually be a headwind to our teams and end up taking more time. So let's just take a quick look at some examples of where AI is set to, where it's helping today, and maybe a glimpse into what's happening, in the future, especially around things like large language models. So let's take a look at, a typical detection lifecycle of threat management lifecycle of detection, investigation, and response. So AI has been very effectively traditional AI. So when I think about things like machine learning and deep learning, that kind of traditional AI, which is very good at classifying things as good or bad, or is this a picture of a dog or a cat? Is this type of behavior potentially malicious, or is it behavior that we see all the time? So this type of AI has been applied quite broadly within the cybersecurity space, and in the areas of, for example, detection, looking at building behavioral profiles, determining deviations from those, and making an assessment if that deviation is good or bad. Another area where that sort of traditional AI can really help with is in the area of the alerts that are coming out. With the expanded attack surface, move to cloud, more and more data, more and more IT processes using the IT networks, there's always malicious things happening. There's always stuff that needs to be investigated happening. Most of it is benign, but there's always things that don't look quite right. So now AI is playing a really good role in terms of helping SOC analysts actually understand what the priority alerts and incidents are to look at. But importantly, AI can't replace things like a threat intelligence or your business context. It needs to be infused into that workflow. So as well as the analyst seeing what the AI says it thinks is high or low priority, they are also, through the same user experience, able to also see what the different threat intelligence sources are saying, or what your business priorities are saying, from your, for example, your asset database. So infusing that into the workflow is where we have seen those sorts of benefits really help raise the limits. So where are we going next? If we think about large language models and the new type of AI, a lot of time SOC analysts have, our security users have to interpret a lot of really technical data. Now, I'm sure all of you out there have looked at various security tools and alerts and things over the years, and maybe some have dealt with underlying log data and security data. It's really complex. It's like a completely different language, and it takes time to understand that. It can take years for people to really be able to look at something quite technical and determine how they should interpret that and what they should do with it instantaneously. And we have kids coming out of school who are being put in front of screens to look at this data and make decisions to decide whether or not their organization is under attack. Things like large language models can help take information that is quite technical and then present it in a very human-readable form, so they can more easily understand it. And more importantly, they can more easily and more quickly explain it to what's happening to their wider organization and their different stakeholders as well. And this is just one example of how this new generation of AI can really help. That ability to interpret the data, turn it into something that can be understandable, and then consumed either by other humans or other machines. It doesn't replace classical AI or those two other use cases that I gave in terms of detection and classification. In fact, certainly at IBM, we have tried using large language models to do detection and classification. It works, but it's very inefficient and very expensive. The traditional classical deep learning and machine learning is much more effective. However, turning it to apply it to the use cases of interpreting data and explaining it to people, large language models are really, really effective at doing that. And it's really exciting about what could be coming up here. But of course, if we are able to up-level our cyber defenders, we know attackers are starting to leverage large language models and the latest AI for their own for their benefits, be it, for example, writing malware or changing malware so it avoids different detection techniques. Also, phishing is an interest. Phishing is a great use case for generative AI use cases, and we are seeing that evidence from different studies we've been doing in the last 12 months around the use of generative AI in phishing campaigns. You can see here on the sort of left, it isn't quite as effective as humans yet, but it no doubt will get better. It will get better and become more effective and help up-level the attackers as well. And then finally, the area that when I talk to different security leaders, they're most concerned about is how do I stop data leaking out of my models? So if I am almost have no choice but to implement large language models in my organization because the business needs to lift its level and lift its productivity. And security leaders are almost in a reactive mode. What they are most worried about is actual information leakage from large language models. Because as all that data goes in, it's effectively one big blob of data with interconnections between it. It is not a nicely structured relational database where you're able to switch on and off access to different fields. So data leakage from large language models is potentially a large problem. And we're starting to see some evidence of that actually happening now out in the community. So there's a bunch of so we have to really think about how we ensure that the users of large language models actually are protected from attackers in terms of both influencing their outputs as well as stealing data, stealing input data from those models as well. And when we start thinking about that, when we start looking at how can we go about protecting AI models, we need to think about the full life cycle. AI and large language models are no different to existing applications. They have data that you input, you build you build a model or a database, and then you have an application that layers on top of that. That is no different than any sort of new web application that gets built. And attackers will look at targeting each of those each points in that life cycle. As you're preparing data to be put in models, attackers will look to compromise that data. They will look for vulnerabilities in model development, from third parties and APIs. And then as well, once models are produced, we will see evidence of attacking those models, both from as the way attackers attack web apps with SQL injection and cross-site scripting. We'll start seeing prompt injection, prompt techniques being developed to actually extract out data. And a lot of prompts these days, we see in the news and we read online about very simple prompts, where it's very natural language generated. But actually, the more you get into this space, you start realizing that actually machine-generated prompts is a really big thing. And prompts actually have their own pseudocode to them, and can actually be very specifically developed to target extracting very specific information from the model. So we will see those types of attacks happening. So at IBM, we have a secure way of approaching securing AI, and this is applicable to not only large language models, but can be applicable to existing AI models as well. Although obviously that large language models are where people are looking at, are most concerned about at the minute. So basically break it down like any application. You need to secure your data. Who's accessing the data? Where's it coming from? You need to secure the model itself. Make sure that only appropriate applications are accessing the model. And then finally, securing the usage. Who has access to the model? I was talking with a CISO last week of ours, and they are rolling out large language models internally. And the way they are controlling them, securing them, is actually creating smaller models and then restricting use. So where they have PII or sensitive company data in those different models, they create smaller ones, and then they very tightly control who's actually using those models, and they monitor those models, and they collect audit logs on those models. So they're able to continually track if those models are being abused and being accessed inappropriately. And then, of course, the underlying infrastructure for all of this needs to be governed, secured. And then finally, an AI governance layer where the full governance in terms of the provenance of the underlying AI data all the way through to the use can be governed in an end-to-end fashion. So, with this approach, with the evolution in AI, we no doubt are going to be able to extend our limits. Security teams, I think, particularly now with large language models and the maturing of the use of classical AI in the SOC, we will start to see our security teams, their limits raised. We need to obviously still monitor the effectiveness of AI in terms of, is it really raising the limits, or are we just pushing our teams beyond it? And then finally, we do have to really look at what limits we need to place around AI so that we are governing its security and we're not introducing an even larger attack surface than necessary for our defenders to defend. You can access the IBM CIO's guide here to cybersecurity. It's a nice, safe hash there, so you can go to that. And then finally, if we do all of this right, we can go from feeling like this at the end of the week to hopefully all feeling like superheroes at the end of the week. And yep, so I hope you enjoyed that talk, and thank you very much.